This is a story of how I went from a shopaholic beauty salon owner to outdoor adventure loving, fitness type person. This story is called To the Bridge and Back. There are some sections of this where I don't have any videos or pictures, so I'll do my best to fill the gaps. Okay, let's go back. Maybe not that far. Great. When I was a child, I was a dancer. I started at the age of 3.5 and absolutely loved it. I spent all of my free time in the dance studio growing up, and I wasn't interested in anything else. I didn't know how to climb trees. I never went camping. My family wasn't into stuff like that, although we did have this groovy caravan. The first time I went camping, I was 28, and the only reason I went was because I was invited by a guy I fancied. Even then, I didn't like it. My dream as a child was to become a professional dancer, but at the age of 16 I realised that wasn't possible because my family didn't have enough money for performing arts school. So that's when I set my heart on wanting my own beauty salon. I could play with makeup and cosmetics all day long and get paid for it. This next bit is kind of irrelevant, but it's funny. I spent a few summers during the school holidays selling vodka jelly shots in holiday resorts. All jokes aside, it taught me how to be a good saleswoman. Then I attended the London College of Fashion to study beauty therapy, which led me to some great jobs in top beauty spas, including the Disney Magic cruise ship. Then aged 24, I set out by myself in business. I got a £5,500 bank loan and moved into the small basement shop. The business did well, and within 14 months I'd made enough money to relocate to a high street shop and employ staff, and that's where we stayed for 9 years. The business was very successful. We were always fully booked and I earned lots of money, but the problem was no one taught me what to do with that money, so I spent it. I spent it on gadgets and gizmos, designer clothes, fancy furniture. Anything I wanted, I bought it. As I approached 30, I began to panic. I stood in my house surrounded by all my things, and I realised these things weren't making me happy. What I'd thought about for years was being able to run through the countryside, up and over mountains, and do the cool adventures that I'd seen on TV. But how was Beauty Salon Laura able to do any of that? The most I did was a few fitness classes at the gym, and I didn't even like being outdoors. So that's when I decided to swap my belongings for experiences. I started selling all of my things in pursuit of a more fulfilling life. One of the last things I bought as a shopaholic was a pair of running trainers, a really expensive pair, because expensive things makes us good at stuff, right? I laced them up and I was going to go for a run around the block. At the end of my road was a bridge. It was 0.7 miles away, but by the time I got to the bridge, I had to stop. My legs were burning and my lungs were on fire. I had to turn around and walk back home. I was so frustrated. How could I not even run 1 mile? So each day I ran to the bridge and I walked back, and each day I got a little bit further until one day I could run all the way to the bridge and back without stopping. I could run 1.4 miles. Hallelujah! I was becoming a runner. 1.4 miles turned into 5-kilometre park runs. Park runs turned into 10k obstacle races, and as the distances increased, I began wondering what else I could do. Then one day, aged 32, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw an event pop up. It was the kind of event that I'd always dreamt about doing, but just knew I wouldn't be able to do it. It was a 24-hour adventure race. I made a comment, something like, "This looks really cool," and thought nothing more of it. A few hours later, a friend sent me a message saying that he'd seen my comment, he had a spare ticket, and did I want it? I hadn't done any of the right training, I didn't know anyone who was going, and I certainly didn't have any of the right kit. But 6 weeks later, I stood at the start line of a 24-hour event with a team of people I didn't know. 25.5 hours later, the team and I had finished the event. But not only had we finished it, we'd won it, and that was a pivotal moment in my life. I never believed I could have done anything like that, and I thought, if I can do that, what else can I do? It seemed obvious to me. The next event I should do was a 48-hour event. This one was navigating through the Peak District, carrying everything we needed on our back. There was no sleep and I was awake for 56 hours in total. It was brutal. When I finished, I vowed never to do anything like it again because the sleep deprivation was agonising. But somehow these things never quite get out of the system. In April 2015, I was at a friend's house watching the London Marathon on TV. Seeing all these incredible people do this completely remarkable event ignited something inside of me, and I started to get that feeling back. And as if by magic, my phone rang. It was Ben, one of the organisers of the 48-hour event. I thought it was strange that he was calling me, as we weren't chat on the phone kind of friends. He cut straight to the chase, asking me what I was doing next Christmas and did I want to join him and his team to row across the Atlantic Ocean. I said, Ben, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, has anyone ever died doing it? He said he didn't think so. Then I asked, Ben, where is the Atlantic? I told Ben to give me a week to think about it all. 30 minutes later, I called him back and I said yes. How could I let this opportunity pass me by? Especially as now I knew where the Atlantic Ocean was. The team and I were going to take part in the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge 2016. I didn't even know events like this existed, and now I was going to do it. But after several months of planning and preparation, a couple of the team members had to pull out because they had good jobs and families and couldn't do it all. So my new challenge of rowing across the Atlantic was no more. In amongst all of this, things were starting to shift in my life. During the week, I was dressed in high heels, caked in makeup, and making people look pretty. And at the weekend, I was in outdoor gear covered in mud. My values in life were changing, and that led me to make a decision to close my beauty salon. I was still earning good money from the business, but it just wasn't making me happy. It was an impulsive decision to close it, and one that I might end up regretting. I'd always been fortunate in life to turn my entrepreneurial hand to almost anything, but after closing the salon, I was naive to think that an opportunity would just show up. And as the months passed, I realised I didn't really know much more than beauty treatments and moisturisers. I spent the next few years fumbling around looking for a job I was good at, but without success. I got in a pickle financially and mentally, and the day came where I didn't have enough to pay my rent, so ended up sleeping in my van. It sounds cool, but it really wasn't. This wasn't a great time in my life. I didn't have a stable job. I felt as though I didn't have a purpose each day, and I was just about scraping together enough money to eat. How had I gone from a successful business owner to this? This was the toughest time of my life, but it taught me a lot. Despite feeling extremely down and out, there was always this thought in the back of my mind about the Atlantic Ocean. Somehow that thought was a light amongst the dark. In June 2016, I saw an opportunity to row around Great Britain. I thought, well, this isn't the Atlantic Ocean, but it's a great way to try ocean rowing and see the beautiful coastline of this country. I called the company who were organising it, asked a few questions, and at the end they said, "So, are you in?" And I thought to myself, well, I'm not a rower, but once upon a time I wasn't a runner. Maybe I can teach myself how to row like I did with running. By this time I'd found somewhere to live, and I had a rowing machine in my shed, and I would do 10k every morning to get conditioned. It wasn't so much about the distance, but more about getting it done in those uncomfortable conditions and fortifying my mind. One session was in the dark at 4 a.m, 60 minutes with no music and no light. It was so cold that day that the padlock was frozen. I did a 24-hour row on an indoor rowing machine, which was brutal. I ran a marathon across the Great Wall of China with 3 weeks' notice to build mental and physical strength. Then in June 2017, after raising a lot of money to do the challenge, I got on a boat with 3 strangers to row 1,800 miles around Great Britain. This was going to be a social experiment as much as it was a physical challenge. We were 4 different people from 4 completely different walks of life, but we had the time of our life. Our boat was 8.5 metres long by 1.5 metres wide, small for 4 people, but at no point did we feel claustrophobic. We'd sit on deck and have the whole world right at our fingertips. We spent 56 days at sea together, and I was hoping that I didn't enjoy it, because then I could forget about the Atlantic crossing. But I loved it, and it just made me want to row across the Atlantic even more. When I got back from this trip, I still didn't really have a stable job, and the organisers of the GB Row, the same company who builds the ocean rowing boats, asked if I wanted to join their team taking care of their social media. This was the biggest and best offer of work I'd had since closing my beauty salon 2.5 years earlier, and although I didn't have a lot of experience in social media, I jumped at the chance. A few months later, I was flown out to the Canary Islands to work at the start of the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, the exact same challenge I'd entered 2.5 years previous. I stood at the start line waving 25 teams off as they left to row 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. The whole experience was incredible, and you'd think that I would have loved being there, but I was green with envy. My stomach was in knots because I was so jealous of those setting off on a journey of a lifetime. I wanted that to be me. So when I got home, I did the only thing I knew how. I made a video telling the world I wanted to row across the Atlantic, and I posted it on social media. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I needed to make it happen. At first, the video got a great reaction, but then slowly fizzled out, and I began to come to terms with letting the idea go. But then several months later, I got an email from a team of 3 strong women who were planning to do the challenge. They were looking for a 4th member, and did I want to join them? As you can imagine, I said yes. After a handful of training rows, we stepped off land and onto our tiny boat, and we wouldn't see land or any other humans for 6 weeks or more. We took our first oar stroke, and that was it. After 3.5 years, I was finally doing it. Before I get carried away with telling you about this incredible Atlantic adventure, I am going to be making a separate video about it, which will follow on from this one, so be sure to check it out when it's released. The Atlantic Challenge, which was from La Gomera to Antigua, took 43 days, rowing in 2-hour shifts, non-stop, all throughout the day and all throughout the night. We ate dehydrated food, pooed in a bucket, and got blisters on our hands and our bums. I remember sitting on deck in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from land, thinking, how on earth did I get here? I don't even like rowing. I had a lot of time and space to think on that boat, and I thought back to the pair of trainers and the bridge, and I realised that that run to the end of my road had changed my life forever. When finishing the event, I became the social media manager for the Atlantic rowing race, and this is where I gained experience and a love for video creation. After the Atlantic crossing, I was looking for my next adventure, and I started planning a row across the Pacific Ocean, but things didn't really fit together for me, and then COVID-19 happened, and this forced me to stop and reassess. This was also the time where I was honest with myself about what I really wanted to do with my life. I'd wanted to be a video creator for 8 years, and with so much time at home, I just went for it. So at this stage, I've got a question for you. What have you wanted to do for a long time? Perhaps you haven't started yet because of lack of time or energy, or like me, you're a bit scared. So how about you put on your metaphorical trainers and do your version of To the Bridge and Back? I wonder what would happen as a result. You never know what it might lead to. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. It's only through me revisiting it that I realise that one opportunity leads to another, and I must remember to be patient, show up most days and practice. I look forward to sharing my 3,000 mile Atlantic row with you next. Thank you for being here, and see you soon.